Hello and welcome everyone here to the Thriving Marriage Podcast. We're on episode 177, approaching the 200s. That's pretty awesome. And today we're going to be talking about how to unlock intimacy, specifically reigniting the flame and saving your marriage. We hear this a lot from our audience and from our clients that intimacy is lacking and you guys want it back. So this episode is definitely going to be for you guys. And I'm here with Marc Johnston. How's it going, Marc?
Doing all right. Yeah, I'm actually excited to talk about this topic. This is always a great topic for these sort of things here.
Yeah, I really love this one too, because no matter what stage of relationship you're at, there's always something that you can do to actually deepen that level of connection and intimacy between you. And we're going to talk about the appropriate ways to do that here in a little bit. Before we dive into that though, we're going to share our client win of the week. This one is anonymous, but says, "Hi Heather, good morning. I just want to thank you guys for letting me join. I got some much needed insight with my coach yesterday, and my hope is at a 10. Believe it or not, but after just a short 2 weeks of taking off the pressure, she is coming around more so than she has in the last 12 months.
Oh.
And I recall this conversation, and this client was saying that, for over a year, he's been trying to have his wife take divorce off the table, tried to talk to him, completely not communicative, not having any kind of emotional connection or intimacy. And he tried everything you'd think of. So if that sounds familiar, leave a comment. Let us know, what have you tried to do to turn your marriage around, and why do you think that may or may not be working? He tried going to therapy. He tried the self-help books. He tried working on himself. He tried making positive changes, and nothing worked. But after he joined our program, within just 2 weeks, he says, of taking off the pressure, which is one of the first things we talk about, now she is coming around more so than she had in the previous 12 months. And that's exactly what this program and process is designed to do. Marc, any thoughts on this win here?
Well, no, I mean, this person is just starting off, but yeah, what I tend to notice with a lot of people is just making a few small changes tends to make a big difference. Now, of course, this isn't going to solve everything, but it's good to see that even a few small changes made such a big difference for this individual. Going from hardly any interactions for 12 months and then she's coming around a lot more. It's a big shift. And often we just need a few adjustments to get that little bit of a ball rolling. So I'm glad to see that this is the case here.
Yeah, I often talk about that with you guys in our master classes. If you've ever been to one of those, we talk about how just doing a few new things in some new ways is going to get some greatly different results. It's going to put you on a different trajectory for your relationship. Now, let's talk about intimacy. Let's specifically talk about the flame, right? So we talk about we've lost the flame, or how to reignite the flame of passion, of intimacy, of connection. And so, Marc, what does it mean to reignite this flame?
Well, I think a lot of people are looking at this and they're saying, okay, well, when I'm talking about reigniting that flame, they're looking for that excitement, that they're looking to have some passion or emotion in this. In my mind, if I'm just, maybe I'm wrong with this, but I I've been working on relationships so long, I like to break it down almost mechanically. And so I'm thinking okay, a lot of this is about that emotion, it's about that passion, it's about that specifically building up connection and intimacy. Now, specifically, and I'm sure we've probably said this a million times here, just to be clear, when we're talking about intimacy, it's not just sex, and it's a lot more about how close and open and vulnerable you can be with others. And sure, of course, a lot of intimacy can be about that passionate sex, but I think a lot, in my opinion, I don't know if you disagree here, Heather, but in my opinion, most people are talking about that emotional side of it and feeling something exciting from their relationship.
Yeah,
right?
I would absolutely agree. In fact, I know some clients are we actually have great sex and we're actually super passionate in the bedroom because we have really heated arguments, but I don't feel like I can share anything with him or her, or it just feels like we can have great physical connection, but it's almost surface level because there's nothing else really behind it. And then over time, this is what I've usually seen. I don't know if you've seen this too, Marc, but just that even that great sex isn't really enough to sustain the relationship. That has to have the deeper level of connection and commitment and the 5 pillars of a healthy relationship that we talk about.
Yeah.
By the way, if you have not heard of our 5 pillars of a healthy relationship, just leave a comment and say 5 pillars. And we have a fabulous new free guide for you guys outlining exactly what those 5 pillars are so that you can really establish a healthy, fulfilling relationship. So that's just a little side note. But yes, it's definitely more than passionate sex. Although to me, that's like a symptom or a benefit or side effect
Sure. Yeah.
of everything else going really, really well, right? It means that you have the whole package. And so I understand that for a lot of our audience, it can be really difficult to, go from where you are right now. Maybe you have frequent fights, talks of separation, maybe even divorce, to really being close, connected, and having that intimacy as a couple. And that's exactly though what we want to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
One of the caveats I'm going to give here, before we go into like, why has intimacy died? Why are you not having this connection? Why don't you feel safe to share things, right? Why is the passion lacking? We're definitely going to go into that. But one of the caveats I want to give is so many people, when their spouse is pulling away from them, wanting a divorce, they push for this connection and they push for this intimacy too soon. Okay. So as Marc and I share this with you today, it's really important that you apply the right solution to your problem. And the best way to do that is with expert guidance help to know, is this the right thing for me to do at this time? Because far too many of you are guys wanting to create that connection so that they stop pulling away from you more. But if you push too hard, too fast, too soon, it's going to backfire.
Well, actually, I'm going to take a slight step back from that, because I actually think I've boiled down some of these principles such that they could probably start them whenever, and we will get into that. I want to talk about how like some of our solutions here are going to apply across the board, but like a little bit later down in our conversation. Yeah. So
just as we share, just be mindful about where you are in the process, because my marriage with Ben is right now is gonna be very different than where it was 8 years ago. And so the same things, I would be mindful of how I apply them. So let's talk about, why does this even happen? Why do we lose the flame? Why does intimacy and passion die? What do you see, Marc?
Well, I think we all see this a little bit, and we're all aware that we've at least seen, if not your own, but you've at least seen some marriages drift apart. And this one comment I remember hearing when I was newlywed still sticks out to me, and it felt off at the time. I remember someone commenting to my wife and I, they're like, "Oh, it's great that you guys are so cuddly, and like you seem very affectionate." And they're like, it's good while that lasts, because later on, most marriages just become a bit of a business relationship. And I was like, oh, that doesn't sound quite right. But like this kind of idea permeates through our culture. And I think a lot of where that comes from, it's just simply an issue with, like, one, I would say boundaries, but two, a problem with priorities. And it's really easy, especially in those early stages, especially when people are married a little bit younger, for other priorities, other things that are important to require a little bit of attention. Things like kids and careers and hobbies and other people. I mean, Heather, I'm sure you've heard from the clients, like they'll say, yeah, we had a really great relationship, and then like the kids came along, or my wife or my husband got too involved in their career, or they got really into their hobbies, or these other friends, and I just felt abandoned a little bit. We've heard that lots and lots, right? Yeah. I think a lot of times just what happens with this is as all these other important things become the focus, a lot of the boundaries that protect the marriage from those other important things start dropping away. I know for my wife Jennifer and I, we've had to reinstate boundaries at different points within our marriage in order to protect the marriage. We've had to say, okay, no, we're going to cut out some kids' activities in order to protect some date nights. We're going to cut out maybe these other like career opportunities in order to shore up the marriage, or things like that, because we've been very mindful to have those boundaries, and sometimes we need to be reminded of them. But I think a lot of why that dies is because those boundaries drop away, and essentially a lot of bids for attention, a lot of desires to connect go unanswered. What are your thoughts there? Anything to add with that?
Yeah, I've certainly seen this. And it's a constant thing to be vigilant of in my own marriage too. Because there are so many demands. We do tend to be so busy. We have big goals and things that we're working towards. And so we always have to make sure that we're measuring what's good, better, and best, because sometimes a lot of really good things or even better things might prevent us from focusing on the best things. So using a lot of open communication and understanding about that, about what are the most important things for us to focus on. Yes, helping extended family is important, but we cannot do so at the neglect of our own relationship. Yes, helping the children develop their talents and their schooling and all these things are very important, but are they more important than you and I having the ability to connect alone, one-on-one every day, right? So I've kind of broken it down before. In fact, I'm putting out a new YouTube video about this, about let's see, it's the 15-7-7 rule. So it's 15 minutes a day where you connect with each other, prioritize looking each other in the eye, having deep actual connection, put down all the devices, having at least 15 minutes of meaningful emotional conversation, connection. And then every 7 days going on a date, and about every 7 months, try to get a night away together to have that couple time. Now that might look a little bit different here and there, but really making sure that you prioritize the relationship, making sure it is at the top of your best list is what's going to keep it in the best shape. Best healthy functional relationships are those that are nurtured and prioritized.
I think there's a little bit more than just lack of attention, though, right?
Absolutely.
I think a lot of where the pain comes in, a lot of like where we start really doing some damage is essentially when these attempts to connect where there's some amount of rejection or some amount of ignoring that goes on. And I mean, I think these two concepts are related. You might have the priorities of the kids or the career, and here is your spouse trying to say, hey, can we spend some time together? And you're like, well, no, not now. But I think this is actually like, what is the mechanical functional piece of like what causes damage? It's this, how are the bids for connection actually treated? I mean, let's imagine a scenario where, say, you share something personal, or you say, hey, can we spend some time together? You want to share something private with your partner, and they just get upset, or it turns into a fight. And you say, hey, can we spend some time together? And they're like, can't you see how busy I am? Like, I have to do all these things for the kids, and they're needing me. I don't know about you, Heather, like that, just even imagine that, putting myself in that kind of headspace, it feels terrible. This is where intimacy kind of it develops, or it breeds. I think it's a lot about the ability for two people to be able to be open and honest and vulnerable, be able to recognize those bids and be able to receive them well. I think when that openness and vulnerability is treated well, it really can foster a lot of that passion, that intimacy. And when it's rejected or ignored, it tends to drive people away. This is actually specifically, I believe this is a Gottman principle. It's like the whole concept of bids for connection. I don't know if everyone out there is aware of this, but like, so for the background knowledge people, Gottman, John Gottman, Dr. John Gottman is like the big name in marriage research. So he, what is that concept called? It's I know the like outline, it's like a house. What is it called? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm not sure. I know the 4 horsemen of divorce really well. I'm not sure about the other one.
It's called the sound relationship house. That's what it is.
Okay.
And so like within the whole Gottman teachings, there's this concept of like, okay, here's this house. This is what like deep relationships are built from. It's like, I pulled the image up on my computer as we're talking, but like some of the cornerstones are like this commitment and trust, but really in there is this one principle, and honestly, I think it's a little bit wordy as a principle, but he says turn towards instead of away. That's like one of these foundational things that's needed for a sound relationship. And if we like went a little bit deeper into this, essentially what it's about is exactly what you and I have been talking about. It's these bids for connection, some bids for just really about anything. And I think we go into this, and Gottman talks about 3 ways that one can potentially respond to one of these bids. He says, hey, you can either turn towards, which means you can acknowledge or receive the bid. You can turn away, ignoring and missing it, or you can turn against. You can reject it, and you can be argumentative and belligerent. And how we attend to those bids has a huge, huge, huge impact on that connection, that intimacy, that passion. Let's put this all together for a second here, Heather. What are some thoughts? Like, you want to put this all together for us?
I'll do my best.
I'm just
right,
just kind of throwing I'm throwing Heather under the bus here. Like, yeah, one of you.
Well, basically, like, so intimacy, passion dies either due to lack of attention or because we've made these bids to our partner and it was met with pain or rejection, either because our partner just ignored the bid, missed the bid, was ambivalent to the bid, right? I'll give an example. Like, if I'm trying to cuddle up to Ben and he's on his phone and I'm like wanting to share something really important with him, and he's just kind of checked out on his phone, then he's kind of missed the bid, right? I'm wanting to connect with him, and then I feel a certain level of rejection. Your phone's more important, right? Or it could even be turning against the bid. Here I'm like wanting to talk about something really important, and instead of receiving that well, maybe he turns it into an argument, makes, some, I don't know, accuses me of something, or goes into problem solving mode, and I get upset about that, right? So it can turn into an argument, belligerent kind of response to that. And so the more this happens in a relationship, the more intimacy is going to suffer and eventually die and deteriorate, right? But when we turn towards or acknowledge and receive the bid and do it in a healthy way, then that fosters intimacy. Did I get it?
No, I think it's a excellent summary of like where we're at right now. So I just kind of want to bring this home a little bit further and maybe give some examples. Like, I'm thinking of just my own relationship with Jen. And to be clear, like, these bids can be just about anything. It can be, like you said, you going in to cuddle up with your husband. It could be, I think when I was reading up on this what was sticking out to me, like, they were even saying, hey, a bid might be, can you pass me that glass of water? It's a very small bid, but it's like, here's this thing that I'm requesting something from you, and I'm expecting some sort of response. But like, I can think of those moments where I've created some of these big bids in my relationship with my wife, and because of how my wife responded, these are like pivotal moments of connection within our relationship. I can remember, this is like before she and I were married. I can remember this one example where, like, a previous girlfriend, like when I was, I think, 15, had got me into writing in this website. It was called, I think it was called like Open Diary or something, where people could go in, put their journal entries, and other people could comment. And I accumulated a few years while I was dating this other girl. And at some point I was like, you know what, Jennifer, I'd been dating her for a while. She was asking about like just how I grew up, and I said, hey, I can show you some of this. And we ended up looking through that for some hours, and this was a very personal, like, part of my life. I was sharing some very deep things, thoughts that I'd accumulated over years, and it was received really well. There's some joking and teasing, but like, ultimately it was lots of acceptance and a lot of positivity. And so this was like a moment where I made a bid saying, hey, I'm going to be open, I'm going to be vulnerable a little bit here. And, if we're talking about these different ways to respond to these bids, like, Jennifer was very, very well in receiving that. And it sticks out in my mind as one of these pivotal moments of connection, like that kind of defined our relationship. And not everything is going to be quite as pivotal as that. It's that sort of thing is nowhere near equal to that other example I gave of like, hey, can you pass me that glass of water? But these are all these points where we can build up connection, intimacy, perhaps even some passion as we, as that is built up even further. Well, I don't know about you. Like, have there been some defining moments like that for you and Ben?
Absolutely.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
You don't need to share anything like deeply personal.
Well, we have this podcast, and I do often share deeply personal things. So I'm putting out some bids of vulnerability to our audience, and that's usually well received. And so as you guys are listening though too, I would also love to hear your comments and what your thoughts are. Are there some bids for connection that you've made that have been either ignored or even flat out rejected by your spouse? And do you feel like maybe they have made some bids to you? And have you received them well? Were you even aware that they were a bid? Were you aware of how your partner would have liked to have received your partner to receive that, right? Do you know how your partner wants you to respond? Not like we have to just do everything our partner wants. I'm not saying that, but if you understand how they would like for you to respond to that, then you can have that understanding and create even deeper levels of connection. So I'd love to hear in the chat what has been going on recently for you guys. I'm imagining, because I talk to you guys so often every single day for years and years and years, that a lot of you are like, yeah, I'm trying to make these bids and they're just getting rejected. I'm making these bids, they're getting rejected. I'm making these bids, they're getting rejected. I've tried this and this and this and this, and they're just getting rejected. And it's getting thrown back in my face. And so why are we even talking about this, right? And we'll show you why in a little bit. Just one example I did want to say that was especially well received. I have had a very hard time in my life being very open about mistakes and wrongdoings. Okay. I grew up with trying to hide things and cover things up so I wouldn't get in trouble, right? That's a very normal kid reaction, except I carried it way over into my adult life far longer than I would like to admit. Okay. And early in our marriage, it was the first year of our marriage, we had a brand new, not a new truck, but a new truck to us. It was very much a used truck, but for a new married couple, this was a big deal that we bought our first vehicle together. And I was trying to park it in our little apartment parking lot. And I accidentally hit the car next to me as I was parking a truck. I wasn't used to parking big things. And I didn't say anything to my husband. And I regret this to this day, because guess what? He was upstairs and heard it and saw it, and he never said anything. So what do you think that did to our level of trust and connection and intimacy? Right? It was a huge block, because if I couldn't be honest about mistakes that I made and he knew I made them, then that was a major breach in intimacy, right? We couldn't have that deep level of openness and trust. And so I'm still embarrassed about that today. We did end up fixing it, and I apologized to him, but I was like, yeah, I've definitely got a hang up there. And so here's where I did it, where it was well received. Over the years, Ben has shown me that I can open up and share what I did wrong, and that he isn't just going to beat me up about it. He's not going to get angry. He's not going to be upset. He's not going to make me feel like the worst person in the world. He's going to help me work through that. And so even the last little while, sharing with him, I made a very poor choice and just came clean about it immediately to him as soon as I just, that was what I was going to do. And so he met it with a lot of grace and a lot of understanding and working through it with me, so that I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel like I had to hide. And that is incredible to receive that from another person, because then you're like, I can be who I really am, even with all my flaws, all my mistakes, all my wrong choices, and this person still loves and accepts me. And he's willing to help me through this, not just tear me up. And so that's definitely woven a deeper level of connection between us and safety, that I feel that I don't have to just worry about covering things up anymore and hiding who I am and what I've done, but that I can be really honest and really vulnerable with him. Mm-hmm. So that's where it was really well received. Just an example there. There's moments when I I know Ben's making a bid for connection and I don't always receive it well. So I'm also going to be clear about that. Like, he loves to try to snuggle and be playful and flirtatious when I'm like in the middle of making dinner. We have 8 kids and there might be something like trying to like burning. I often make bacon because I love it. And so I'm like, I have to get the bacon. And so he has to like understand that. But I also recognize in the years past, sometimes I shut it down so much that he felt a level of rejection about that. And so now I'll be like, let me get the bacon and then we'll dance in the kitchen. Promise, right? And so just making sure that we are aware of what our partner's bids are and then how to respond to them is really important.
So I want to like shift this a little over into like these crisis scenarios, because I think a lot of our audience is in that situation. Because I think you were pointing out earlier, you're saying, well, a lot of our audience, they're saying, well, I'm making these bids and I keep getting shut down and this is really hard. But I think pretty much what we're saying here is that a lot of times these bids are, if we're just going to define it, it's a way of reaching out and looking for a response. And I think that if you're having some big problems, I think you can almost always trace it back to somewhere along the way, a lot of these bids being either ignored or rejected, even if it's unintentionally, even if it's just like maybe your partner believed that you were ignoring or rejecting it, even if it wasn't like what you were actually trying to do. But I think that very few people are going to have serious problems when those bids are consistently accepted. So I'm building a case here, people. I'm just saying, hey, look, these bids are important. Rejecting them and ignoring them leads to problems, and treating them well is one way to build this back up. I think a lot of times what comes out in these crisis scenarios, we see, you know, if we're going off the Gottman principles, we start seeing a lot of these 4 horsemen that you mentioned earlier, that defensiveness, criticism, contempt, and stonewalling, right? But I think even underneath a lot of those negative behaviors, around a lot of complaints, I think in these crisis scenarios, these are really a lot of hidden bids that's kind of hidden underneath all the garbage right there. Mm-hmm. And so if we clear a lot of this garbage out, there's something to work with and something to build up some amount of connection and intimacy. And remember, we were talking about how, hey, I was saying, it doesn't matter where you are, we're going to break it down on a basic level so that people could deal with this wherever they are. This is that. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, I think a lot of complaints, a lot of criticisms, a lot of like when you have a lot of tension might not look like a bid, but if you pull back, get rid of all that negativity, underneath is almost always a request of some sort. We might hear that dreaded phrase. We might hear, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. And we can kind of guess at some bids, some requests here. They might be saying, I wish I had a relationship where I felt some positive emotion, some passion. I wish I had a relationship where I felt like there's some fun. There's something about it that this person would like to correct. We might even have like accusations like, you're such a narcissist. We hear that with some frequency here. And we can, you know, guess at some bids, some requests, and saying, I'm wanting to feel more considered. I want what I want to feel like it matters. Same thing with like this accusation of like, you're so controlling. They might be saying, I want more freedom or less tension, or I want a sense of ease. I don't want to feel like, you know, I have to be answer to such exacting demands. But like underneath a lot of this are what I would usually consider very reasonable bids and requests. It's just hidden underneath a lot of other stuff that's not really necessary to get to the solution. So what do we do with this? Like, Heather, if we're saying a lot of the complaints, a lot of the criticism is actually underneath of it some really good principles here, something that we can build on to build some connection, how do we get there a little easier?
Yeah, so it's kind of, let's play detective a little bit with what our spouse is saying and doing. Let's look at some of these negative things that they're saying, maybe some of the complaints, the criticisms, and reframe those negative bids as a positive bid, because essentially complaints are these negative bids, as Marc explained, right? And it can be really difficult to respond well when you're getting negative bids, when your spouse is complaining and they're saying, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. You're so controlling, whatever, right? And the typical responses go right into the 4 horsemen of divorce again, but we've got to talk about defensiveness, stonewalling, maybe escalating the situation into an argument, blaming them, maybe just shutting down and avoiding the problem altogether, right? So it can become a lot easier to turn things around if you reframe this negative bid as actually a positive request. And this is something that we kind of help our clients like decode, right? So let's just give a bit of an example here. So maybe the wife is saying, what are you doing with the kids? Why did you even think that taking them out so late is going to be okay? The husband could say, okay, I see that you're upset and it seems like you are concerned about the kids.
But there's the bid.
There's the bit.
Yep.
I wonder if we need to set up some clear expectations or boundaries so we don't have to come to this point again. So when we can find ways to say yes to what our partner is actually asking for, even if it's in a negative light, if we can find a way to turn that into something that we can provide or say yes to, that is going to help create more intimacy, kind of build that bridge and start to reignite that flame.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So like when we're saying, how can I possibly build intimacy or passion or connection when they will hardly talk to me? And I think it's exactly what you were talking about right there. There are still a lot of opportunities to respond well to the bids that are happening, even in a crisis scenario. So like you said, like even a fight over co-parenting can turn into this positive scenario where the two of you actually work through something that's needed. You turn that bid into to like this positive experience. And I'm going to point out, like on my end, I don't like sitting in the space of saying, giving suggestions that are a bit reactive or passive. Like to me, like I think this is a great principle. I think it's really good to be on the lookout for these bids, but at the same time, like I have a hard time giving it as a suggestion because I feel like if I'm giving the suggestion, it's hard to have control over that. Mm-hmm. Like if I say, hey, go out and wait for your partner to give you some bids, mm-hmm. like what's going to happen? They're going to most people are going to sit around waiting. So I like I said, I think it's a good principle, and I want to go a step further. Right. So I think that there's many ways to be proactive with receiving bids from your partner. Essentially, I think there's a lot of ways to create opportunities to say yes with almost like some proactive receiving. So I think like with the time that we have left, I want to differentiate a little bit between what that general and passive receiving versus more proactive, very, I don't know what, yeah, that's the best word I'm going to say. I'm going to stick with that, proactive receiving. I don't know, you want to start off the discussion? Let's talk about general receiving first.
Yeah, so this is when your partner is being open or vulnerable with you. And so you can look at it like, are they sharing something personal about themselves, like their work, their hobbies, their interests? Then this is a clue that this is definitely a bid, right? Mm-hmm. Are they sharing opinions, worldviews, belief statements about values? Could they be sharing fears, concerns, sensitive feedback? And especially the one that most of you are probably getting, sharing complaints, blame, criticism, right? So I'd love for you, if you're open and willing to, put in the chat right now, what are some of these that your spouse may have shared in the last 7 days with you? Mm-hmm. Are they criticizing you? Are they blaming you? Do they have a complaint? Have they shared something vulnerable, emotional, right? A statement about values. I don't trust you. There's a value of I trust is important. I value trust, right? Are they blaming you? You'll never change. You don't listen to me. You don't hear me. Whatever that is, put that in the chat and really be aware that this is an opportunity. Okay.
I want to challenge them. I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to challenge everyone listening a step further. I'm going to share that. And I want you to kind of give your own thoughts about what you think the bid is from your partner. If they are sharing some of those things, what are they asking for? Like if we if we clear away a lot of the garbage.
Yeah. And my mind's just immediately tying this into home messages, which maybe we'll touch on that later. But that's how we shift their negative story, their negative belief about you, is we understand that this is the negative thing that they're saying they don't want, the reason why they want out, the reason why they're wanting to pull away. And then we're going to flip that, because these are opportunities for you to establish even more intimacy, even when they're being overly negative or critical, even when it might not even seem founded what they're saying. Okay. They could be totally off the mark, and yet they're still revealing something that is being asked for. Okay. So of course there may need to be some boundaries, and establish healthier interactions, but even complaints are a form of sharing. So if I feel like I don't have a voice in our relationship. Okay. I've heard that one from my husband, Ben, right? This is a complaint, right? You don't listen. You're not even trying to understand where I'm coming from. I feel like I don't even have a voice here, right? That's a complaint. He's not saying, sitting down, Heather, I'd like to make this emotional bid, to have this deeper level of connection, to have a voice in their relationship. They're never going to say that. Mark's shaking his head, right? They're never going to like use those words. But when I hear, you're not listening, you're not understanding, I don't have a voice, that can come across as criticism, complaint, and blame, I could get defensive. I could show him why that's not true, blah, 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 right? But that's not going to get us anywhere. So the question is, are you receiving them well as they're sharing with you? Are you getting defensive? Are you getting critical of them in turn? Are you just shutting down? Do you go on the attack? It's very easy to make mistakes, especially if you disagree with what they are sharing. So there's a very fine line between receiving someone while they're being negative towards you and also being a doormat, okay? We don't want you just to take all of that and be a doormat here, but we want you to decode what they're saying and use that as a way to receive the feedback, right? The bid for connection in a healthy way. So Marc, how do you receive someone that may be even being very negative, critical, blaming, but how can you still take that and receive that in a healthy way?
I think it's a really good question for the topic today, because I was even talking to one of our clients earlier, and his wife was complaining a whole lot. Like, in the back of my mind, after he told me like what was going on, my first immediate like gut response was like, man, she is really overreacting about some things. I couldn't say that, I wasn't going to say that directly, but we figured a few things out. And anyways, the reason why I bring this up is part of the problem was like my client was taking a lot of our teachings, and he was basically taking a lot of this abuse and just rolling with it, and wasn't really standing up for his side. I think if we're talking about receiving in healthy ways, there definitely needs to be this discussion of what is wanted, and this is a lot of like what we've been talking about, some recognition of like, okay, underneath all this junk, what are they actually asking for? But I think the other piece of this is making sure that there is some space within this discussion for you to be a person as well. Like it's effectively about creating some boundaries. And with the client that I was talking about earlier, I was saying, hey, just your response, the way you've been sharing this, are you happy with that? And he said, no, I'm not really happy with that. But he's like, but I want to make sure that she's feeling hurt. And I was like, well, but that's not sustainable. And so I said, well, what are you wanting? And he says, well, here she is, she's avoiding this problem, and I just want to talk about it. And I said, great, let's talk about how we can create some boundaries around that, and how you can make this request, and how you can approach this with a lot of health. And if she doesn't want to negotiate with you, then we have some other options. We have some stuff that you can control. So I think a lot of this is about that balance there. It's like, are we being calm? Are we looking underneath that junk, and we're looking at what the other person is really wanting? Are we creating some space for that? And then balancing that out and saying, is this feeling healthy for me? What am I needing from this scenario to clearly say yes to this situation? And I think as long as you are balancing that out, that there's consideration for them and consideration for how you need to handle it as well, then I think that's a really healthy way to receive these bids.
Awesome. Love that. All right. Now, Mark, if we can dive into what is proactive receiving. So we talked about just kind of this general receiving and being aware that this negative feedback, criticism, complaints, blaming is actually a bid for something. They're actually wanting something. Let's go, like you said, take a step further into this proactive receiving.
Yeah, so this is like where I'll sometimes have some discussion with some clients, especially when there's a lot of silence on the other end, because it's hard to respond to a bid if there just aren't any bids going on. This is what I was talking about earlier. Is like I feel frustrated myself as I'm trying to help people when there's very little to respond to. So I'm like, okay, let's make sure that the people that we're working with have some control here. I think it's a really good place to start with that is to increase that intimacy, that vulnerability, is to be able to demonstrate some of that vulnerability yourself first, and to create environments where that's going to be safe for you. I think then even further, if you want to take that a little bit further, is to then create those environments for your partner to be vulnerable as well. So like, if I go back to my example, like here I was with my wife, we had been dating for, and man, I'm looking back at that. I was like, man, I really went out on a limb sharing a lot of stuff with someone I'd only been dating for about a year. But I'm going to point out, as I said, this was a pivotal moment, and I wasn't like just a dummy about this. I said, I had some discussion with my then girlfriend. I said, Jennifer, like, hey, I'm going to share this with you, but I really need you to be sensitive to this. I might not use these. I might not have been quite so eloquent back then, but I do recall the discussion. I said, hey, this is very personal to me, and I would really appreciate if we treat this with some sensitivity. And she's like, you know what? I really appreciate you sharing this. We established essentially some understanding about how we're going to treat this situation first. And I think like this made it a lot easier for me to proactively be a little bit vulnerable. But like just even me doing that allowed my wife to open a lot more to me later on down the road. A lot of this, I think, if we're really boiling it down into what it's about, I think it's about having a lot of deliberate intention and discussion around intimacy, around vulnerability, around connection. And I think even in with a lot of our clients who are in these crisis scenarios, I actually think that there's a lot of opportunity for that. So Heather, like most of our clients, they still have a fair amount of interaction with their spouse, right? Where are they connecting? They're connecting around what, like co-parenting,
Yeah.
at the very bare minimum, right? Co-parenting, there might be some clarification that's needed about like the state of the relationship. We have a lot of clients that are sharing businesses, right? You know, there might need to be some discussions around boundaries, even, you know, especially as a relationship shifts, there might need to be discussion around that. What do we do with that? Like, to me, I don't know your opinion here, these all seem like very good opportunities to be proactive here.
Yeah.
So how would we like talk about some of these things? Should we pick a topic and kind of go into it, or what do you think?
Let's do that. Yeah, and it's bringing to my mind acceptable arenas, Mark, which you coined as finding the areas where we can connect, where we can find some common ground. If you guys want to see the podcast on acceptable arenas, where we go really deep into that, just leave a comment, say acceptable arenas, and we'll send you the replay of that one. So yeah, let's take one. Let's do co-parenting, because I think that's a really big one. So I hear a lot, like you as well, from our audience and from our clients, that they won't talk to me about anything but the kids, right? Or like how to manage you know, dividing up time between them or whatever like that. So how could they use even something like co-parenting as a way to build this proactive receiving to deepen this connection?
So like I was just mentioning here, we were saying, hey, there needs to be a lot of deliberate intention, a lot of deliberate discussion, a lot of like setting up for vulnerability. So like one way to approach something like that, it might be to say, hey, we've had a lot of tension lately. And I want to make sure that especially our conversations around co-parenting feel really good, because I really want to make sure that we can have very open conversations, ones where we can be a little bit vulnerable with each other. The kids are that important to me. Can we sit down and like hash some things out so that these conversations feel better? It would really help me to be able to be at least, I was going to say close with you, but like it allows you to approach some objectives by like approaching it like that. So do you hear how I'm very clearly sharing my intentions, and I'm saying, I'm stating the problem. I'm creating a space to very clearly discuss some expectations around this. But it's very deliberate with intentions around, with boundaries, with like needing to, as you put it, like establish these acceptable arenas to create a safe space. I'm recognizing that like this is just normal for me to discuss things in this way, and I'm also recognizing that I don't know if I've really broken this down effectively for the audience. Is there more to describe like how this approach is working besides like deliberate intention, deliberate discussion, creating boundaries? Is that pretty much everything?
Let's just walk through like a bit of a role play or something, like a scenario here. Let's say that the wife's the one pulling away, doesn't want to talk to the husband, shutting down communication, maybe wants full custody of the kids. And her narrative, I'm just pulling this off the top of my head, her narrative is, I can't trust you because you had an affair a year ago.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got an affair.
No, I know it's a good setup. It's a good setup. So
them pulling away, and she's saying, I don't want to talk to you about the relationship. And so by now he's learned I can't talk to her about the marriage because that's not going to go anywhere. So we found this acceptable arena around the kids. She is willing to talk about the kids and how to address that going forward, but she wants full custody. Let's say that's the situation. It's a pretty dire one, but we've seen even worse than that, of course.
Sure. Yeah, so in that situation, I think I would approach it much the same way. I'd say, hey, look, there's been a lot of tension. I can recognize that you're saying that you don't trust me, and yet at the same time, we do need to be able to discuss parenting in some open ways. And I'd really like to make sure that at least this area right here feels a lot more open. So like, even if we leave out some of these other areas, I think I'd like to figure out how we could be a little bit more safe with our conversations, so that there could be more trust in the situation right here. Now, stepping out of the role for a second, if I wanted to go a little bit further, I might volunteer some vulnerabilities. I might say, hey, I'm really scared here. I might say, I want to be very open myself. I'm pretty scared here about how this is going to affect the kids. And I want to make sure that I'm pushing past that, and I want to make sure that we are not pushing this aside like we used to. So like there was a small bit of vulnerability in this hypothetical scenario that Heather and I are creating.
Right. I love that. The coach part of my brain was like identifying. I'm like, oh, there's the home message. She doesn't trust you. You said, I'd like to build some trust. I'd like to build some openness. I'd like to build some safety. And so these are the things that we work with our clients every single day. We show them exactly how to say things like this, how to open up the conversation, what are the acceptable arenas that you can connect about, what are the things that you can do to better receive their bids and to open up vulnerability yourself, so you're more vulnerable, so that they are also going to be in turn feel more safe to be vulnerable, right? And we rehearse them with you. So we don't just say, here's the principle, now go do it. Like, we literally craft with you sometimes exactly the text message to send or how to have the in-person conversation. And we practice that with you so that by the time you're there, you know how to do it in a different way. And you can break some of the patterns that may have been preventing that intimacy and that connection, that are further breaking down the relationship, right? Whether that might be, maybe you'd blow up, you'd get blaming them, you'd get critical of them, or defensive, or maybe you would just shut down, you'd pull back, you would go into silent mode because you don't know what to say, so you end up saying nothing. We break all of those patterns that are unhealthy and show you how to use the opportunities in front of you to your greatest advantage, so that every interaction you're having is helping move your relationship forward. Now, sometimes they still shoot that down. right? Sometimes, Mark, you gave this beautiful example of how to approach this wife in this hypothetical situation. And what if she just is like, no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't trust you. I don't think it's going to go well. Even after you've been vulnerable, even after you've made this like open request without any pressure.
Yeah, I think there's I intended for this to be like a very clear cut sort of direction, but like you bring up a good question with that, like what happens when we shoot this down. I'm almost wondering if this necessitates a whole other discussion between you and I to talk about this. But if I had to look at this very, very broadly, when we boil a lot of this down, this is coming down to like some clarity with agreements and interactions. In my mind, if you are approaching a scenario like this in as healthy a way as possible, you also need to consider where are your boundaries and what is necessary for you to continue to engage in that scenario. And if some of those boundaries or those lines are crossed, you also have to consider like what does that mean for you? Because I think very often a lot of our clients, they get into this scenario where they are approaching the relationship in very healthy ways, and then they keep getting rejected. And at some point, well, at first they say, well, I'm trying to fix the marriage, I can put up with this. But at some point, it's not healthy to continue to approach it that way. And I think it's a kind of a sensitive dance or a sensitive line to walk, to say like, where are you being patient? Where are you putting in these bids? And then where are you putting boundaries? And when are you pushing for some consequences? Sometimes this might mean cutting off some of those conversations. Sometimes that might mean withholding some of the benefits from the relationship in order for it to feel more healthy. I think this is a very tricky thing to answer, say like what happens when we shoot this down, because it can be different very much depending on if this is a healthy relationship, a struggling relationship, a marriage in crisis, or one that's like just on the brink of divorce. Consequences are going to vary very wildly.
Right. And based on the different situation of each marriage and what's going on there. And again, that's why we encourage you to have an expert guide you through this, so that you're not left to try to guess and try to figure it out yourself. One of the worst things you can do is try to do it yourself. While Mark and I do try to share some overall principles to help everyone move forward in their relationships, the best results happen with one-on-one expert care. To me, my marriage is too important. I cannot risk getting it wrong. So that is why I have outside help that knows, an expert that knows how to look at exactly what's going on in the situation and guide us forward in the positive direction. So that's what we also do here at High Thrive Coaching. If you want to get on a free marriage analysis session with us, just type comment below and say session, and we'll get you the link to book that. We're almost completely full this week. We have been very, very full the last several weeks. And so I'd like to get you in as fast as we can, but spots do fill up super fast. All right. So that is how to reignite the flame and save your marriage. And I hope that now you've come away from this discussion, even if your marriage is in crisis, or even if it's on the verge of divorce, you now know that there are things you can do, even in this situation, to start to build some more safety, some more connection, to identify what the bids are that your spouse is giving you, and how when you meet those well and you increase your own vulnerability with your spouse in healthy ways, then it can really start to turn things around for you. It can start to reignite that flame. We have to go slow to go fast, but it is possible. And our clients are living proof of that every single day. So if you want more help with this, just type intimacy, and I would love to have a private conversation with you on Facebook or even on a call. Just leave a comment, say intimacy, and we'll go even deeper into where you're at and how we can get that going for you. Let's go now to our marriage myth buster. This one is: a lack of trust is a sign of a failing marriage.
So almost always when we come to this point, we're saying, okay, these are myths. They're false. And well, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a secret. So, we quite often have like one of our assistants look through a lot of the comments and pull out the comments that you guys have been making as a way to like generate some of these myths. So, usually when I'm preparing for these podcasts, I come and here's the myth. And so I look at that and I was like, wait a moment. That's actually true here.
That's a true statement. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no myth here.
Yeah.
I mean, this is exactly what we've been talking about today, is this kind of concept of where does intimacy, connection, and related to those things, trust, where does that start falling apart? And, so I wanted to comment a little bit on like the impact that has. If I'm looking at a relationship and I'm seeing that there's a big trouble, a lot of friction around trust, and nothing is being done to repair that, that is a relationship that's heading in a very poor direction. It tends to impact a lot of very crucial pieces of a relationship. It happens to impact the ability to be open, to share intimate emotions, to discuss vulnerability, to discuss concerns. Beyond that, I see a lot of scenarios where a lack of trust kind of almost gives this certain layer over all interactions of some amount of stress. I've seen many cases where there's a lack of trust, and anytime that the couple's apart, the person lacking trust, they're saying, I don't know if you're lying to me, cheating on me, spending time with someone else, whether you're telling the truth. Like, so just over normal interactions, there's this like tension that just sits over everything. And that, in my opinion, if like nothing is done to remedy that, it tends to eat away at the relationship. I would say slowly, but it can be very quickly as well. I think that trust, without trust, those deeper parts of a relationship that we were talking about today are taken away, and over a long enough time, it's just going to wreck a relationship. So in my opinion, like if people are starting to say, hey, I can't trust you, or I can't trust the relationship, if the relationship isn't already recognized as being in a crisis without any remedy, I would anticipate it's going to get there soon. So yes, in terms of the statement, a lack of trust is a sign of a failing marriage. Without anything done to remedy that, it's going to be heading there.
Right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. So thank you for joining us today. And in our next episode, we're going to share with you how to save your marriage when your spouse doesn't want to. So make sure you join us next week, and we can't wait to see your marriage thrive.
Everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.